Well, it's Brigitte Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Tony Stewart. He's the author of a newly released book called Carrying the Tiger, Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving. It's about his late wife. And by the way, as recording this is the release date. Can you say hi, Tony?
Yes, I'd love to say hi, and I wanted to say I'm so excited. I realize that this interview won't air for a few months, but as we are talking, literally my book, that all those pre-order buttons turned into buy now on all the websites this morning, and I'm just completely excited, waiting to see what happens.
This is exciting. I mean, the story in your book is not exciting, but it's just shows you the tenacity that you have to help get this message out there. And I think it's your first book, is my understanding, correct?
Yes, it's my first book.
And my first thought was, why did you decide to write this and to share it with the world?
That's a really good question, and it has about three parts to the answer. So
Oh, good.
settle in, settle in. If we go back to the beginning, I didn't expect any of this to be public. When my wife and I learned that she had tumors, we started communicating with our friends. She had a lot of friends. It never occurred to us to keep it secret from our friends. It wasn't a conscious choice. We just let our friends know. And we soon realized we needed to set up a way to communicate with them without it being a lot of emails flying back and forth, because the emails were starting to swamp us. So someone told us about caringbridge.org, which is a nonprofit website that you can go to and set up like a private little stripped down Facebook sort of thing where you can write posts about what's going on with you or your loved one's cancer or journey, whatever health journey, and your friends will all be able to read it, and then they can write comments just like on a social media app, but you're able to keep it private. So we did exactly that. And Lynn, my wife, who was happy to talk about her cancer with her friends, um, didn't want to do the writing. So starting from the very beginning, she asked me to write the posts. And she would look over my shoulder, we would look at them together, and she would have me edit them sometimes and take out, like, oh no, don't tell them that much about my pain, or don't tell them about my diarrhea, that's too messy. But other than that, she was very open, and I wrote them. And they started out being very factual, matter of fact. You know, the first week or two, it's like we went to this doctor and they said this, and we're scared, and now we're going to that doctor. And then this went on for years. Lynn had incurable stage 4 non-smokers lung cancer from the beginning. And when we started, we thought it was going to be quite short. You know, the prognosis for most people with that disease caught at that late stage is 6 months to 2 years. But we were very lucky. Through various twists and turns, Lynn got into a clinical trial that extended her life considerably. So this for 6 years, I
Wow.
was writing posts on Caring Bridge about Lynn's condition, and it went up and down. We had some horrible scares. You can read all about that in Carrying the Tiger. That's the whole first half of the book, is the story of living with her cancer. Um, and during that time, I found myself getting more and more emotionally involved in the posts and revealing more about myself, but still only writing to a couple of hundred friends. Then the drugs stopped working. We went through home hospice, which is the middle part of the book, Dying with Grace. And then Lynn died, and I plunged into the shattering grief that anyone who's been through this kind of loss will tell you you can't avoid it. And then slowly started to come out of it. And by then I was so addicted to writing these posts that I kept writing the posts in the Lynn Catula Caring Bridge Journal even after she died. And friends of mine would write these supportive comments. I was actually apologetic when I kept going after she died. Like, this was sharing information about her, and suddenly I'm turning it into like my journal of my grief journal and what I feel like today and what this is. And it became very personal and very much centered on me. And I don't have that big an ego. But my friends wrote comments, and her friends saying, please keep going. What you're writing is helping us. And that's when I first got the seed that maybe what I was writing could be something worthwhile to a wider audience.
Right. That is very, very helpful that just for everybody, because you were the caretaker,
I
basically.
I was.
And that's a lot of people don't realize who haven't been down this road. It's a lot of stress on both sides, and you're helping that person try to stay alive as long as possible, right? You
Mhm.
did, and it was great that she
Yeah.
got into that. Um, what was it that she was involved in that extended her life?
Um, she so she started out with lung tumors and that had metastasized to her spine. The first thing that happened was we had to deal with the tumors growing into her spine. Like the very first day, I felt like we were tumbling down the rabbit hole in out of this world. The doctor said, "You have stage 4 cancer. We don't even need a test. I'm sure you have stage 4 cancer. I can tell from the pattern of your tumors that have gone into your spine. I see this all the time. But we can't start treating your lung cancer because you have to deal with that tumor that's in your spine. If it keeps growing, you could be paralyzed in a matter of weeks." So the first thing was dealing with that. We went for intensive radiation. And then we started on treatment for the lung cancer. And that's where, through a series of twists and turns, we discovered and then got Lynn into a clinical trial for a combination of what's called a targeted therapy drug, which is easier on your body than chemo. She had the very good luck that when they did a genetic analysis of her tumor, they said, "Oh, you're eligible for this targeted therapy." That was not a clinical trial. That existed at the time, was proven,
Okay.
but people would typically get 6 months, a year and a half of life from it. It would just be easier than chemo. And then they said, but we have this other new thing that we're testing, an immunotherapy drug that is supposed to work on tumors with your kind of characteristic. We'd like you to do a trial where you get to take both these drugs together. And that was huge for us because I had heard about clinical trials, where like half the people get a placebo, which, by the way, is actually not how they typically do it when you have life-threatening cancer. They don't do a placebo version of the trial for people who would die if they had a placebo. But I thought that if you go into one of these trials, you have a 50-50 chance of not getting anything. And in this case, what they were saying was, no, we will guarantee you will take the drug you would have taken anyway. And on top of that, we're going to try this immunotherapy drug and see if the two together work well for you. And that's what happened. Those two drugs together held down Lynn's cancer tumors for 6 years. They never went away. There was never remission. We always knew that this death sentence was hanging over us and that one of these years, those drugs were going to stop working. They told us that from the very beginning, but they worked for 6 years. Meanwhile, during those same 6 years, the damage to her spine at the beginning had been huge, both from the tumor that had burrowed into her spine and also then the radiation, the intensive radiation they used to zap it. And so a lot of the twists and turns in the first half of the book and in our lives were about dealing with this kind of progressive spinal damage and then the fallout and the side effects from those treatments, which could have happened to someone without cancer.
Correct. There's pros and cons to every situation. And you, at least I see it, the positive side. You extended her life to be with her.
Yeah.
That's really what you spent more time with her. And did she, what was she doing before? Do they have any idea of what caused this lung cancer? I'm just
No.
curious. Yeah,
No.
it's not from
Uh,
smoking, obviously, like you
no,
said.
it's in
Yeah.
in her case, it's not from smoking. And I should just say for everyone out there, at least half of all lung cancer is not related to smoking.
Right.
It's
People
just
blame it on,
like
yeah.
saying I got breast cancer, but my mother didn't have breast cancer. Where did this come from? You don't necessarily know. Um, Lynn was a painter,
Okay.
so she did in her painting studio before they knew enough to say don't use turpentine and all. She used solvents and things for years, but she kept the windows open. She was athletic, energetic. Um, there's no way to know. No one's. It just happened. For a lot of us, it's as we get older. She was in her late 60s at the time she was diagnosed. I was 10 years younger. Um, so she had lived a reasonably full life by the time this started to happen, and it could just be one of those genetic malfunctions in your body that can happen to any of us for no known reason. We'll never know.
It's right. Something can trigger it. And everybody, like you said, is dealing with something. And I've had, as we talked earlier, I had cancer as well. And they're like, how did I get this? And I
Yeah.
did the same thing as your wife. I was very took care of myself, but you just don't know what you're going to be exposed to. And
Hmm.
it's just a lot of it is environmental. I think you just don't know. You can't blame it on one thing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly. Because it's this mix of things. I've heard other people who are convinced, we as a culture and in our personalities, we always want to find a cause, an explanation. And
Right.
so if you can point to something environmental, then you will. But in fact, it's a mixture. There's
Yes.
environmental things that mess with us, there's our genetic makeup that messes with us, and then there's just random chance. Because what's happening is that your cells are constantly, it's like evolution happening inside your body. Your cells are constantly replicating, dying and replicating. That's like generations and generations of evolution. And every now and then something goes wrong in one of those cells that they can't even figure out why. And that becomes a cancer tumor if you're really out of luck.
That's true. I like the way you explain that. Our bodies are an ecosystem, and we
Yeah,
can replicate. And they're probably. I'm glad there's research out there that's helping extend lives and try to define it. And that's what you have symptoms that could be. Certain symptoms could be caused by a different thing. That's why it's so confusing, and that's why I have a lot of I shouldn't say pride, but people who are involved in this, like
mm,
what you're doing, you're getting this message out there. Those people that are doing the research, she was involved in this clinical trial. We're just learning. I think that this is so important that we keep doing this. And you got to be, it's scary what you went through. I could just imagine, especially as a spouse, but you were there, you supported her, right?
I did support her. It was harder than I realized. At first, that whole first year was, looking back, I would just say horrible. I mean, so much was going on. There's one chapter in the book which ends with Lynn and I, everything's just turned right. Everything's good. We've got a handle on everything. We assume we'll have, 6 months or more of, maybe a year before things go wrong again. It never occurred to us we would only have 2 weeks because then just 2 weeks later, something started to crumble in her back. This was that kind of year. And for me, it was very, very intense. I dealt with that underlying fear by basically ignoring it and looking at the step by step. I've done big projects all my life. I made movies in my 20s. I designed software. I've done some things which are projects that take a long time and require a lot of planning, and I'm very comfortable in that world. So I just treated all of this like a project.
That's
And it's like,
awesome. I
but
shouldn't say awesome, but
that
you
it
took your
was my
skills.
coping mechanism and it was helpful, you know?
Right, your skill set, you applied it to the situation,
Totally.
personal
And
situation.
Lynn didn't have the same personality and wasn't like I'd be out there researching websites half the night, finding all kinds of information that was never going to be useful to us, but I was filing it away in case this happens, in case that happens. And she looked at the same websites and they terrified her because they tell you people tell stories about how their drugs stopped working and now they're facing death. And she did not want to read that stuff while we didn't know
Yeah.
how long she'd have. Um, But then at the end of that first year, I started becoming so exhausted mentally, physically. I had a whole series of accidents that are all described in the book. And then I had a little mini breakdown, sobbing, finally admitting to Lynn that I was going to collapse. I couldn't keep doing this. I had been holding so much in. And it wasn't just physical, it's also the emotional. Because as things were bad and as we didn't know how long this would last, I started having thoughts, which I later learned from my therapist that I got later are completely normal. But I started having thoughts like maybe it would be better if Lynn died sooner rather than later because this is killing us in a in a metaphorical way,
Right.
or I really wish we could have sex the way we used to. The changes in her body have meant that we can't do whatever we used to do. Which is not to say that we stopped being intimate. It's just, we had to accommodate these dramatic changes to her body. And I was holding all of this in. I was afraid to tell her any of those things because she so counted on me to be her rock that I didn't want to let her know that actually her rock was having all of these second thoughts and fears himself. And finally, they burst out. I just collapsed. I was sobbing on the bed we still had our coats on. We had just come back for some appointment, and I couldn't take it anymore. And she was so nice. She just pulled me to her and said she understood and touched my head and cared for me. It was one of the most beautiful moments and encouraged me to go get some help.
That's good. It was a lot of weight on you when you mentioned the word rock. I'm thinking that was a really big weight that is not what you were expecting. You're trying to do the right thing. But I'm glad that she supported you back. So
Yes,
that's a great relationship that you
I
had.
tried. I tried to find a couple of places in the book where I could point out that it wasn't all one way, and some of them are flashbacks to other things that happened in our lives. We were a couple. We were a very tight couple. We'd been together almost 30 years at the time of the diagnosis, and more like 35 when she died. And of course, in a relationship that turned out to work out very well, after whatever bumps and things it had, as all do in the beginning, we were a very tight couple, and she supported me many times. And even with her cancer, it was really important to her to support me. I'm
At
actually
least,
thinking, sorry.
no, I was just saying, at least that you guys stayed connected. And I think that is so helpful.
I think we got more connected. I look at those years from the first day when we got the phone call that there were tumors through to hospice and where she died at home beside me. And we were able to talk about it because she didn't lose the ability to talk until the last few days of her life.
Oh, wow.
Um, Even as tumors were going into her brain and making her thoughts harder, she was still there. Uh, I think that whole thing was a journey towards being closer and closer and closer together. You can use all these metaphors. We're in a foxhole together with shells around us. We're I actually wrote that one in the book, and then I said, no, 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 that's too warlike, and I turned it into two trees bending in the wind
I
together.
like that.
I
Yeah.
like that better too.
Yeah, you got to bend, and
Yeah.
it is part of life, and you're using it. I see it as a nature analogy, right?
Yes.
The trees bending and the wind involved, and you're together, but hopefully the wind doesn't push so hard. It could break you, right?
It
Eventually.
could, it could, but the whole thing about learning to live with cancer or some other really difficult long-term challenge like this is finding ways to bend without breaking.
Be flexible, right?
Be flexible, absolutely. Figure out next steps. I hate the fight battle metaphor that we all fall into. I found myself using a word like that just the other day, and like I said, I initially wrote a metaphor in the book about being in a foxhole because it sets you up for emotional failure when, as happens with, if you're lucky, if you're really lucky and you have cancer, you're scared to death, but it turns out they caught it early and they can deal with it, and your prognosis is 20, 30, 40 indefinite years,
Right.
then maybe battling it works because you have a chance of beating it. But when they catch your cancer at like stage 3 plus or 4, they tell you right up front, you will have cancer for the rest of your life. The only question is, how long will your life be and how much you'll be able to enjoy it. And that's where you are. So if you start saying, I'm going to fight my cancer and I'm going to beat it, you are setting yourself up, I mean, in our situation, for a failure. I preferred to think of it as learning to live with the cancer.
Right. I
Yeah.
I was going to say I don't like the word cancer warrior. I just don't like it. I think it's
Hmm.
negative. I
Yeah.
like the word you're thriving. I mean, you're living with it, right?
Yeah.
Thriving
That's
is a
what
little
you, well,
better.
but you're trying to, I mean, some periods of those 6 years, there were several of those years when things actually went really well. I mean, the whole first half of the book, which is called Living with Cancer, most of it covers about 3 years. And then things started to go well. And we really had 2.5 lovely years. The tumors were still there. They were always visible in all these scans. They never went away. But we were having life. And as happens when you find yourself facing death, and it's a truism, and I'm sure everyone you've ever talked to has said it, or if someone didn't, I'll be very surprised. The world becomes a more beautiful place. You become
Yes.
so much more aware of what you got because you know you're going to lose it. In this case, What I was going to lose was my lovely wife and our relationship and all the good times we were having together. And what Lynn was going to lose was all of that, plus her whole life, everything. Neither of us is religious, I should say. We're
Right.
spiritual. We have no idea whether there may or may not be an afterlife or your spirit lives on or something. We're both kind of in that boat. But we're perfectly open to the idea that you just go to sleep and everything goes black. I mean, we just don't know, the two of us. So she's looking at the end of her life in a very real way without believing that there's necessarily a heaven or an afterlife.
That's true. You don't know. I still like to think that I will become a dog when, or I was a dog because I like dogs. I
Yeah.
think it's because you're based on your personality.
Hmm.
As a human. I'm not religious either, but I can't think of the name of the movie, but where some humans become dogs and then their souls go into different bodies. I thought that was interesting.
That's pretty cool.
Uh-huh. I mean,
I'm,
we don't know, Tony. And
yeah, I know. And I do frequently wonder whether Lynn's spirit is having a good time somewhere, somehow. And someone asked me once if I thought Lynn was looking down on me, and now it's been 4 years since she died. And I said, I hope she's got better things to do with her life. She could check in on me occasionally, but I want her to be having a good time.
that's true. And it made me, as you were talking, and then I talked about my dog situation. The title of your book is Carrie the Tiger. Maybe she's a tiger.
Maybe she is. We both loved cats. Love cat. I mean, I've got
Right,
seven.
right.
We, um, and so yeah, it's
You don't know,
you
right?
don't know.
That's kind of how I like to look at she's excuse me, my sinuses are bothering me. That you just don't know what the future is going to bring, but you need to definitely embrace it. We
Yeah.
appreciate what's in front of us. And I think that the positive aspect of what you guys had to deal with is you learn to appreciate what you have and what's around you. And you're talking about life and it's just so important. And it's not about competition, right?
Yep.
It's not
No,
about that.
it's about realizing the beauty and joy and grace that's all around you that you have. In our case, we were not particularly romantic. Oh, for the up until the day of her that first phone call, I would call it her diagnosis. The formal diagnosis actually took a couple of weeks, required a biopsy and stuff. But as I said, we got a phone call right away, tumors in her body, scared to death.
Yeah.
um, that did turn out to be, incurable cancer. Uh, and that night, we started telling each other, I love you, openly and affectionately, more than we had in our whole marriage. It just, it just made it really important to acknowledge to each other how special it is, how special what we had was and what we meant to each other. We'd both known it. It's just we didn't believe in those kind of gestures. It isn't even a conscious intellectual belief. It just didn't come naturally to either of us, which made us a good fit for each other. If I didn't give her a Valentine's Day card, she didn't miss it because she wouldn't give me one either.
That's
Right.
funny. Well, yeah, I think your personalities, I should say they changed, but you opened up more with each other, like you said, because you knew the end was coming. We all know that, but you acknowledged it sooner than expected
Yeah.
uh, with the diagnosis.
I mean,
Like I, I was gonna say, I mentioned the tiger thing too. Why did you use that title? I'm assuming because you mentioned she liked cats. Is that Carrie the Tiger?
no,
No, okay, what does it have to
there's
do
a
with?
specific story behind it.
Okay.
3 or 4 weeks in those early days, Lynn got an email from a friend who had been reading our posts, but she chose to send an email, don't know why, saying, in my Tai Chi group, Lynn and I didn't know anything about Tai Chi. In my Tai Chi group, we carry tigers to help people who are facing difficult circumstances. The three motions of bending low, picking up the tiger, and putting it on a mountaintop far away make that tiger less threatening
Ah,
and easier to deal with what you have to face. So
that's
Lynn
great.
wrote back to her friend and said, could you teach me how to carry tigers? And that is where the title of the book comes from. I didn't realize that was going to be the title of the book. This is it's kind of funny how these things work. I wrote that anecdote was in the book from like the second or third draft, right? It was sitting there for months and months and months. At the same time, I was going through these sheets of paper where I kept writing down more and more titles. I was trying to come up with a title for the book. And it was only months later that I was out riding my bike in a beautiful place on a nice day, not thinking about my book at all. And I suddenly went, oh my gosh, the title is sitting there. It's waiting for me. It's been there the whole time. And I pulled it out. You know, I kept the anecdote in the book and I just pulled those words out and turned them into the title.
I like how you mentioned you're out riding your bike outside, and it's like it helps your brain relax a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And just you're focusing, and then it helped your brain told you or reminded you that it's there. And
That it's there. And all of those weeks, because you sweat bullets over this stuff as a writer.
yeah.
I went through at least 100 subtitles before arriving at this sort of verbose one. I suddenly realized one day I had all these subtitles like A Caregiver's Journey and junk like that are all perfectly accurate and platitudinous and kind of boring and a little soft. And then I realized I want people, when they see the title Carrying the Tiger, they're not going to have any idea what this book is. And one of the things that can really hurt you as an author is if people read a book thinking it's something other than what it turns out to be, because then they'll write bad reviews about it. You know, they'll tell their friends this was a crummy book, things like that. I don't want people to read Carrying the Tiger unless they're ready to go on this particular journey. So one day I realized I'm just going to spell it out. And the book was already in these 3 sections, which almost have the same words in the title. The first one is the same: Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving. I'm just going to spell that out so that, and I put a memoir on the cover also. We tried the book title and the cover. I sent it, I have a newsletter, you know, for people who are interested in my writing. And I sent it out the initial cover, and it said Carrying the Tiger and the subtitle, and people wrote back, ignoring the subtitle, saying, what is this, a book about cats? Or is this a children's book? Or is this a book about Eastern philosophy? So I put a memoir right on it. Now you look at that title and the words a memoir and the 3 lines of what's in it, and you know you're either up for this journey with me or no, this isn't what I want, where I want to go today, which is totally legit.
I'd like that you mentioned adding the memoir, being more specific, because some people's expectations of how they're translating words could mean different things. I think that's really good that you thought about it. You did a lot of, I'm assuming you had an editor help you, or
I did. I had an editor, there's a graphic designer who did the outer side of the outer covers, and then another designer who designed the inside of the book, all of those kinds of things. No, I set out on the publishing part of this journey. At first, I thought I was only going to like go to the Xerox shop and make 100 copies and put a spiral binder on them and offer them to my friends. But I sent an early draft to a bunch of what are called beta readers, which are people I knew, was able to get in touch with. I've since learned you can actually pay strangers to do this. I didn't know that. I sent it to people like from my high school reunion who hadn't seen me in 40 years, who were willing to read the book. I had enough of a connection. Anyway, a bunch of people read the book, and I specifically said, do you make it to the end without having to force yourself to turn the pages? And do you think that I should go ahead and try and publish this? And I got back not just generally yes, 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 but also from one person, Tony, this book, I was crying so much, and this book helped me transition from the death of my best friend. And another said, my wife just died, and I almost didn't read your book, but it helped me so much. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to do this. And then I set out to publish it. And at first I thought I would publish it in a way where you would never know that it was self-published. And so I hired all these people and spent real money on making a beautiful book and all of that. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, actually, it doesn't matter. And there's a lot to be gained from being open about the fact that this is an independently published book, that I'm bringing it to the world, And yes, I have made it such that if you found it in a bookstore, you would never know that it was self-published. But this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm spending the year doing, is trying to bring this story to the world.
I I like that you understand the importance of adding other value of those other people, the editors and the designers and all. It helps your book look more, what's the word, official? Is that the word?
Oh, it's immensely it's so much better than I would have done if I had tried to do these things myself. Now, I hired real professionals
Good.
who do this all the time, and the book got much better, and the editor was wonderful. She told me I had given her fantastic material, but she still spent 2 months going through the thing and proposed all these little changes and suggestions and cuts that made it significantly better.
That is really good feedback that you got. Now I'm going to kind of go back to the actual book content. You
Oh, yeah.
mentioned there's 3 sections.
hmm
Oh, you talked about the first and the middle. So what about the third section? How's that?
Finding joy while grieving.
Yeah.
This is my story of what it was like starting on the day Lynn died and going for the next year and a half. A large part of that is somewhat compressed. It's not as long as the first section by any means. Um, when Lynn died, I naively thought that because we had done so many things, quote, right, which is to say, we were together, we decided to have home hospice, we talked about all of this stuff. I had no major regrets about treatment decisions, things we had done, not done. There's a million things that usually will eat you up, or often eat people alive when their partner dies. And we had avoided them just by good luck and whatever. I thought my grief might be shallower or shorter than otherwise. And I got plunged right into the thick of it, just like any other grieving person, although everyone's grief is actually their own. Everyone grieves differently. And I couldn't stop writing about it. I was writing these posts day after day, charting the days. So the first part of that is really the first 6 weeks after Lynn died, what it was like to live, for me, to live in those 6 weeks. And I've actually not seen, I've only seen one other book. I mean, I'm not aware of all the millions of books out there, but I'm only aware of one other book by a famous author named Joan Didion, in which she does something similar, although in her case it's a whole year after her husband died. Uh, it's just that intimate acquaintance that you as the reader have looking over my shoulder of what it was like for me. And this is the most controversial section of the book in the sense of the comments I've gotten back. I've gotten comments that say, this is my favorite part of the book. This is where it becomes extraordinary. And I've got comments that say, oh, I don't know, the forward motion stopped. I've been right with you through all the forward motion of living with cancer and then hospice, and now you're just kind of wallowing around for 6 weeks. I didn't find that part of the book as interesting. For me, it's the heart of the book. For me, the 2 chapters, the hospice of what it was like to actually be with her while she was dying day by day, and then these 6 weeks of this confusion and grief and thinking about it and slowly starting to grasp at things that will help me find my way forward. These for me are the emotional heart of the book, and it's part of what I wanted to share. And then what happens in real life and in the book is that while I was still hugely deeply grieving, I started to fall for someone else. And this was guilt. It has filled me with guilt and confusion and the possibility of joy all at the same time. And I should add here, Lynn gave me permission. Lynn explicitly gave me permission at the start of hospice when we talked about these things to have another girlfriend someday. But of course, we both thought this would be in a few years after
Right.
I come out of or get through the worst part of my grief. And instead, I connected with an acquaintance who lived 1,000 miles away, a woman I had only known in childhood, because I sent her an email inviting her to Lynn's Zoom memorial. And we started talking by email and then by phone about our shared grief because she had just gone through some losses in her life. At a time when this was during COVID, and I was very much alone here in physically, and I was so grieving. And here is another grieving person, and we glommed onto each other, and this attraction started to form. That after a few weeks of talking, she just stopped and said, "Tony, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Because I've got a big crush on you," which was like, wow, so brave to be that emotionally open. And yes, I was feeling exactly the same thing and would never have admitted it.
Wow, I think that's beautiful actually, because your wife, Lynn, she knew that you're going to continue living, right?
Yes.
And she
Yes.
didn't want you to be in grief and sad the rest of your
Yeah,
life on.
exactly. Exactly. It was even, it's a very cool conversation. That night that we talked, she asked me what I thought would happen. So this is the night that she decided to stop drugs and start hospice, literally that night. And we had a really intimate conversation, and she asked me what I thought would happen, and I said, be terribly sad, and eventually I guess I'll meet someone and hopefully fall in love again. And she looked at me and said, "I don't ever want you to have another girlfriend." But then she immediately nodded her head and said, "Yeah, I do want you to have a girlfriend." "No, no, I don't want you to have a girlfriend." "Yeah, I do want you to have another girlfriend." And she ended on that. But there's this wonderful contradiction because, of course, she wanted me to be with her forever. And yet she wanted me to be happy. And she
That's true.
gave me
Like,
that permission.
as some people move on, like I should say move on, but you found a connection with somebody else who had similar experience, and there's some people who never do. So I don't think
Yeah.
those people that are alone, I don't know if they are happy. And right,
It may
we don't
be,
we don't
I
know.
mean, I don't, I, like you, where you swallowed the phrase move on, I don't want to use move on because about grief,
Yes,
because my grief is still in me. I cried
yes.
just the other day. I'm 4.5 years in. I am in a happy relationship with that woman now. Uh, but my grief is still in me. It's just gets into it. I call it, the last part of the book, inside the book, is called I Carry Your Heart. Outside, it
Oh,
says Finding Joy While Grieving in the subtitle, but that same section in the book is called I Carry Your Heart. And it's about how I learned to hold on to Lynn in my heart while being open to having another relationship, which
I,
for me is, go ahead.
she would be happy that you're doing this, I think.
I think so too. I think so too. Um, in another conversation, I was asked what I thought she would think if she was looking down on me, aware of this. And I do think she would be happy. I also think she would be very embarrassed about all of this attention that is, it's like
For the
this.
book, yeah.
Three-quarters of this book is a love letter to her. I can't have all of these deep emotions and explain them if I don't explain who she was and why we had a good thing and why I loved her so much. So the book is like a giant love letter to her. And she was a private person, and I think she would be a little embarrassed by all of that while simultaneously happy for me.
Well, she married somebody that was more open. There you go. That's kind of those kind of right, yin and yang.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, she made me more open. And
Okay.
that I talk about in the book, starting in flashbacks. It's like I was not this open when I met Lynn. And through our 30 plus years of being together, she encouraged me to talk about my feelings and things in ways that I just had not been open to, a typical kind of guy. Um, and then this whole process of caring bridge and writing about my emotions and then getting feedback from the comments in Caring Bridge got me to be yet more openly emotional. And then finally turning all of that into a book where I went back and put in the stuff that Lynn had asked me to leave out and more about my feelings and my breakdown, because that breakdown was not in Caring Bridge, but it was very real and it's very important to the story. That's yet more revealing. So this whole thing has been this journey for me too into being much more open about my emotions than I used to be.
I really like you're being brave because a lot of men aren't as open as you because you're doing this in the book and on podcast conversations and right. And you got a newsletter now. You never thought this would happen,
I totally never did.
but I think it's a good thing. I really
I,
truly do.
I think it's a wonderful thing. I started out this last few months like you get all this information, how to market your book, and oh, you have to have a newsletter and try and get on podcasts and stuff. And I thought of it all as work. And instead, this has been the most wonderful, exciting, fascinating 4 or 5 months, 6 months now. And I love my podcast conversations. You are asking me things that really bring me out and let us tell a story that is exactly the story I wanted to share. And I do want to say, after I've now been interviewed on several podcasts, and after the third or fourth interview, I signed up to take a course to become a certified grief educator with David Kessler, who runs grief.com and is a wonderful, wonderful teacher and expert in this field. And I'm 4 weeks into the 12-week course right now and loving every minute of it. And it's because I'm so enjoying being asked to talk about the journey that I went on that I think this may keep going. This may be part of my life indefinitely. I don't know that I'll become a counselor. I have no idea what I'll do with this certificate. Right. But I wanted to understand more about what grief is. Having lived it myself, what's it like for other people? What are the generalities that I can actually draw from it as opposed to my personal experience? And when someone asks me questions, I want to be more knowledgeable. So this whole thing is changing me.
It is. You kind of found your purpose. Lynn,
I hope.
Unfortunately, Lynn passed away, but it helped you find a way to move forward in life. And
yes.
I think this is really cool. I like the podcasting aspect as well. I wasn't expected to do one, but I created it, just this podcast, because of the stuff I went through and raising kids. And like, that's kind of why I'm like, okay, that's why I call it real things rather than all this fake persona stuff. Sorry, that's I think it's really cool. And I love your cat, by the way, that keeps going out. For those that are not seeing the video, his cat's walking back and forth, which I love. What's the name of your cat?
This cat is Lily.
Lily.
And there's a story in the book about how we adopted her. And she was Lynn's cat, beloved cat, at the time that Lynn died. And there's even a photo of Lynn just a week or two before she died with Lynn on her sleeping on her chest.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Lily sleeping.
Right. That is. I think that's beautiful. I think animals help as well to be more at peace.
Very much. Very much. I write about that. The book is full of all of everything that I could think of where I think, if I were writing a how-to, this is one of the things I would try and tell people. But I don't want my book to be a how-to. I want my book to be, you're looking over my shoulder. So in Carrying the Tiger, I made sure to put in all these tiny little anecdotes, which for me are where you can draw the lessons and the conclusions if you want to. And you decide which ones are important to you. But I definitely put in about how our previous cat had been so helpful, and then he died. He just reached the natural end of his life during the middle of the living with cancer. And at first, Lynn could not bring herself to replace him and get another cat. And then one day she just said, I'm ready. I need to do this. And we went and got Lily and another cat that I have named Boo. And that little story is in the book. I don't draw any conclusions in the book, but in my life, I think I'm trying to show how important having these animals was for us.
I have connected with you on these stories. I just love you're very inspirational and you're very positive. You understood that you had to deal with the grief, but have moved forward, but you're still carrying Lynn's heart with you. And the cats helped. I think it is a beautiful, beautiful testimony of what your book is about. And I'm trying to get emotional. This is a really beautiful story, Tony. So where can people learn more about you?
So the best thing to do is to go to my website, TonyStewartAuthor.com. You will find everything you would want there. You can read excerpts from the book. There's buttons to all of the stores. You can go straight from there to its Amazon page or any other store where you want to buy it. The book is out in ebook and audio and print, by the way. Okay. So if you want to listen to it, you can. But you go to Tony Stewart Author, and you'll find all the resources there and the links to my social and the links to where you can get the book, all of that stuff.
And you're Tony Stewart that's not a race car driver, right? Sorry.
This is true. I'm really annoyed at that guy. He's younger than me, and he got TonyStewart.com before I thought of it. I thought of it about 20 years ago, and he was there first. I got TonyStewartAuthor.com.
I love this. I like the humor that you weave in. It's just so important to life. And for those that are listening, I'll include the link that Tony Stewart, author, mentioned in the description.
Mm-hmm.
And I highly recommend you guys check the book out, Carrying the Tiger. And I really appreciate your time, Tony. I love your big heart. You have a big heart.
Thank you, Brigitte, and you clearly do too.
Thanks, guys, for listening. Have a great day.